Welcome back to your home of humanitarian journalism, Salam Media. The time is 9:36, and we'll be shifting our focus now to Iran. They elected their new president. I think it was last Friday. The elections were called after President Ibrahim Raisi died in a helicopter crash on May 19th. The runoff has been considered a tight race, but now President Pezeshkian, who won decisively with almost 3 million more votes than his opponent, Said Jalili, who's a hardliner and former nuclear negotiator. And we're going to be delving into Iran's recent presidential election and the implications of the election of Masoud Pezeshkian and his surprise victory. He's coming with the tag of a reformist candidate, and we all wonder what his election will mean for Iran's political landscape. And joining us to shed light on what we should all expect for Iran's domestic and international policy and international relations is Professor Said Mohammed Marandi, a prominent scholar at the University of Tehran, specializing in Iranian politics. Prof. Marandi, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for giving us your time on Salam Media this morning.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure's all ours. I think if you can give us some context, President Masoud Pezeshkian, he's been described as a reformist. In Iran's political context, what does it mean, and what kind of politician is he, and what kind of changes can we expect from him as the new leader and president of Iran?
Well, it really doesn't mean a great deal, the term reformist, because many differing people and many differing parties with very differing views and policies call themselves reformists, just like there are many different groups and people who call themselves principalists, or what the West likes to call conservatives, and they are very different from one another as well. I would consider Dr. Pezeshkian to be more of a centrist, not dissimilar to Dr. Raisi, who was, I think, a centrist, but a principalist centrist. For example, when we look at foreign policy, they seem to be similar based on the formal statements of Dr. Pezeshkian, President-elect Pezeshkian, who says that he wants to expand ties with the global South. He will continue to support the resistance in West Asia against the apartheid regime and what he calls the illegitimate apartheid regime. And he will continue to negotiate with the West about the nuclear program, just as Dr. Raisi did. In fact, at least in, let's say, his official statements, Dr. Pezeshkian is closer to Dr. Raisi than was his opponent, because his opponent was much more openly skeptical about negotiating with the West.
Speaking of negotiating with the West, I think, during his campaign, President Pezeshkian focused on economic hardships that we all know have been exacerbated by, the sanctions that have been imposed by the West. How realistic are his plans to negotiate with the West to ease these sanctions? Taken into context and given the supreme leader's skepticism towards Western relations with Iran.
Well, Dr. Pezeshkian is also skeptical. He never said that he's optimistic. In fact, during the final debate, he said that if the United States and the West fails to make the right choices, Iran has other options. So there's no fundamental shift in Iran's foreign policy. In fact, I think Dr. Pezeshkian will continue to pursue the policies of Dr. Raisi, who opened Iran up to the global. Dr. Raisi joined BRICS. He joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. He improved ties with Russia, China, India, Central Asia, neighboring countries. He traveled to Latin America and Africa. So he was able to, through a very active foreign policy, decrease Iran's dependence on the West, and that's why we had high economic growth over the last couple of years. So I think that Pezeshkian will be pursuing that course, but he will also again attempt to see if the West is willing to change course and behave in a more reasonable manner. Iran, I think, in the at Iran today, I think is not very different from the Iran that we'll be seeing politically when it comes to foreign policy in the next 6 months.
I want to focus a bit, on the relationship between Pezeshkian and the supreme leader Ayatollah, who has expressed reservations about Pezeshkian's foreign policy approach, particularly regarding relations with the West. How do you see foresee if there'll be any kind of tension playing out during this new administration? With the supreme leader in focus?
No, he hasn't expressed any reservation whatsoever about Dr. Pezeshkian's policy. He told all the candidates in before the election to be wary about the United States and its intentions, but that was not directed at Dr. Pezeshkian in particular. That is something that he has been saying for the last 30 years, very often and repeatedly. His skepticism is well founded because he negotiated with the Americans on numerous occasions, and on every single occasion, the Americans have violated their commitment. So Iran has reason to be cautious, and I think that President elect Pezeshkian has said very clearly in his final debate that he does not trust the West or the Americans. And from what we've seen so far in his public statements after being elected, he has sent a message to the leader of Hezbollah, giving him his full support. He's spoken with the political wing, the head of the political wing of Hamas, giving him his full support. He has spoken to President Putin. He's spoken to President Assad of Syria, who is very key to the support of the movements right as we speak. And that's why the dirty war on Syria by the West and NATO and the regional proxies was carried out in the first place over the last decade or so. And he's also spoken to the president of Venezuela. So we see that the people who he has spoken to so far are the countries that have been Iran's traditional friends and allies.
Just one last thing that I think maybe you can just shed light on is, Iran, seeing probably its lowest voter turnout in this election. Any idea of what this can be attributed to, and also just the public's reaction to the election of President Pezeshkian?
Well, the first round was the lowest, but in the runoff, the turnout increased significantly. And this is the first time in Iran that in a second round runoff election, instead of going down, the turnout goes up. So the second round turnout was quite acceptable. It was, but I think the reason for the first round turnout was partially because of the shock of losing President Raisi. President Raisi was a very popular person, and after he passed away, his popularity went even higher. And this was a very short period for the candidates to make this case on television and elsewhere. And usually in elections in Iran, it takes 6 months. Political parties become active. They go to campuses. They debate. So this didn't happen this time. And also, I think the 6 candidates, especially since President Raisi had just passed away, none of them seemed to be able to connect with the Iranian public like Dr. Raisi, who had just recently passed. So they didn't have that sort of charisma or that attractiveness that President Raisi had, and that caused some people not to be interested. But in the second round, when the two finalists were debating, people became more engaged, and the results were somewhat close. But President-elect Pezeshkian, I think, won a convincing victory, and hopefully his government will be up and running within the next few weeks.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Professor Said Mohammed Mirandi, thank you so much for giving us your time and giving us insight on Iran's new president, Pezeshkian. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm sure as his turn continues to unfold and their developments, I will definitely be linking up with you. Really appreciate you giving us your time. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
That was Professor at the University of Tehran, Professor Said Mohammed Mirandi, giving us all the details about Iran's election and its new president, Masoud Pezeshkian. So it's going to be really, really interesting, particularly with the way geopolitics is at the current moment. What's happening in Gaza, parts of the Middle East, and a new world order kind of unfolding right before our eyes, and Iran playing a very, very integral role in all of that. So it's going to be interesting to see the tenure of President Masoud Pezeshkian and how he deals with all of the allies and all of the enemies that are surrounding Iran. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be speaking with SABMX champion Mianda Maseti, who's going to be making history at this year's Olympics, as she's going to be the first black female to represent South Africa. Interesting one. You don't want to miss it right after this.